walking him through it, but we haven't been successful in getting a hold of him yet.
So I'm seeing 5 directors. Do we have quorum with 5?
Yes, we do, but let me just check my, right, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, we do.
Do we want to just give another minute to try to connect with Elwin before we get started?
Sure.
Okay, so let's just give, 2 minutes for that, and otherwise we'll get started.
I was speaking with some people on the challenges of getting funding for dams like the Chattahoochee and Kajuwajimak. It's a pretty big, they'll need $1.5 million, a pretty big chunk for a small municipality to undertake. And what perhaps is necessary is that conservation authorities should be allowed to do some funding for finance funding for long-term projects like these dams, which are supposed to last 100 years. Anyway, I don't know whether that would have been really productive as opposed to some of the nitpicking away at some of the things that they're asking for. But when bureaucracies get involved, sometimes these things happen that they just, anyway, my thought for the day. How did your Lanark budget go, Crystal?
It went pretty well. I'm glad we moved this by a half an hour because it was really tight to be here for 3:30, so it would have been impossible for 3. But I think we're not in bad shape. We still have some decisions to make. Some of them are big decisions, but no, we're in pretty decent shape and probably ready to get it passed in the next week or 2.
So are you able to make this, are you connecting from the county office then? Or from wherever you do your
No,
time?
I'm in my office right now. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. So that's been a couple more minutes. I don't know, do we have, we've lost Sally now too.
No, I was just checking with Ange whether we had heard back from Elwin so I was just following up on that.
Well, he's had his 2 minutes. I mean,
Yeah, I think we
it'll
should
be a
probably
long
go
meeting.
ahead.
Very good.
All right, and hopefully he can join us as we go here. So I'll call the meeting to order and thank everybody for your flexibility and starting a little bit later today. And Sally, can we go ahead with the roll call?
Yep. Elwin Burke. Eli Alshantiri.
Present.
Teresa Fritz. Glenn Gower. Bill King. Paul Kehoe.
Here.
Krista Lowry.
I'm present.
Gary McAvoy. Janet Mason.
here,
Bill Sweetnam.
Here.
So
Right.
I would let you know that we only have quorum, right? So we can't lose anybody.
Okay. So at 5, we do have quorum of a group of 10. We're okay.
Yeah.
All right. So moving forward then with the adoption of the agenda, there are a few items to add, and Sally, correct if I have misspoken on any of them. So under other new business or other business, excuse me, we'll add 2 items. They're both updates. One is an update on the LiDAR system, and the other is on the NDMP grant application. There's a second item that we will be looking at in camera. So there's a labor relations update, so you can make that number 5. And finally, we will be moving the other business items up above the 2 in camera items, just so that we can have staff go ahead and not wait to the end of the meeting. I think those were all the corrections, Sally?
That's correct.
Okay. So is that clear for everyone?
Fair.
Okay. So is there a mover and seconder then for the agenda as amended?
So I move.
So Eli and Phil? All in favor? So 1, 2, 3,
Agreed.
4. Thank you. There we are. So the agenda is adopted. We have the approval of the minutes. So I'm looking for a mover and seconder for the approval of the minutes. So this is our meeting from September 9th.
I'll move.
Thanks, Janet. And Paul, thank you, Paul. So the motion, be it resolved that the minutes of the Finance and Administration Advisory Committee meeting held September 9th, 2020 be received and approved as printed. All in favor?
Yes.
So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. So that's. So our second item is the interim financial plan and the 10-year capital plan. So this is report 3095-20. And Sally, I'll pass it over to you and Angela.
Very good. I'm just going to share my screen. Everybody see that all right?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So a quick overview of the approach we've taken this year was, as per normal, staff obtained direction from the board in October, and we used October, November to draft the budget. But this year, a week ago today, we first tabled it at the Policy and Priorities Committee because it's not just the budget that we're looking to approve this year, but this interim financial plan, as well as the update to the 10-year capital plan. And thereafter, the approval processes will be the same, except that whereas the budget would go on for circulation, I anticipate that if the board is comfortable that we would actually approve these two documents when we come back in December at the December meeting. So I'm just going to briefly recap what was discussed last week at the Policy and Priorities Committee. We were looking at the whole host of projects that were being considered by staff and that we ran through this priority setting criteria. And based upon an understanding of what the key drivers were, how they assessed in terms of, high, medium, or low risk, and what opportunities there were to offset costs, staff came forward with a variety of priorities, both operating and capital. So I'm going to delve into the capital for starters, and we'll work through the proposed update to the 10-year capital plan, and then I'll get into the 3-year financial plan. So the priorities identified for the 10-year capital plan were areas of higher risk, and our goal in developing the updated plan was to meet our 10-year capital priorities, but not dealing with the greater issue of life cycle replacement of all of our assets. And this is an important takeaway because currently the Conservation Authority is not doing life cycle replacement financial planning. We're simply looking at the pressures over the next 10 years and how we're going to meet them. So the program that we've developed, the capital program, it has spending roughly 75% for water control structures and flood forecasting warning, 15% for conservation areas and any works needed at this site, and 10% for vehicles, equipments, and IT. So, developing the updated capital plan, we had to make some basic assumptions. So the ones under item 1 reflect very much the decisions of the board back in 2018. And the board and the member municipalities don't want to see fluctuations year over year in the capital levy. The focus is on the 10-year capital program, not on annualized life cycle replacement. We obviously have already a fixed annual mortgage that we need to continue to address. And then it's really a matter of how much is left over at the end of the day to use for pay-as-you-go kind of projects or to contribute to reserves for future projects. So we assumed that 40% of our water control structure and flood forecasting and warning projects would be eligible for WECI funding. And the reason is because, strictly speaking, the way that the Section 39 grant and the WECI funding program are designed and delivered is that flow augmentation structures, as opposed to flood control structures, are not eligible for WECI funding. So we do have several structures, 6 out of our 11 structures provide flow augmentation as opposed to flood control. And so they're not eligible for this kind of funding. That's why we've only assumed 40%. We have concluded that further deferral of our high-risk projects is not sustainable, and we really do need to tackle them because these are long outstanding projects that the CHA has deferred, and I think we're at the point where further deferral of several of these capital projects is no longer really putting us in a good position from a liability perspective. When we looked at our projections for this year end, our combined reserves balances will be roughly 1.15 million. And based upon what our projected revenues are for next year and what they were this year, we do have capacity to borrow, and we understand that one or more of our member municipalities would be in a position themselves to be the avenue for us to borrow if we wanted to. So those were the kind of baseline assumptions that we were working with heading into this exercise. So some of our goals were then to mitigate significant increases in the capital levy, to maintain some sort of safety net within the reserves, that we didn't want to deplete them in their entirety, that over the 10-year planning period, we'd want to replenish the reserves, recognizing that we're going to have to do a certain amount of withdrawals on the reserves to deliver the program. And to make sure that the highest risk projects and acquisitions were completed in the early term, and that we pushed out the less high risk or medium risk projects to later in the 10-year term. So some of the key findings and recommendations coming out of this analysis were that, it was evident to us that our current reserve balances do not allow for timely life cycle replacement in any of the asset classes. And this is an important takeaway for us in terms of our future long-term planning. When we did the costing analysis for Shabamika and Kashwakamak, debt financing is necessary to be able to afford both. And that this holds true regardless of the technology used, because most of the cost to complete both of those projects is not associated with using a bascule gate. We have, as I mentioned, deferred some projects to later in the 10-year period. But that means that we need to contribute to the reserves in the interim if we're going to be able to afford them in those outer years. In the case of the LIDAR project, as was previously discussed, we propose to borrow from the operating reserve and then to repay that reserve over time going forward. In the case of some lower, medium and lower risk projects, some of them are low value, and they also have a certain amount of public appeal. And there's a feeling that perhaps we pursue those projects only if we're able to get subsidies or grants or fundraising through the foundation and the like. Sorry, I'm just readmitting Eli. So lastly, at some point going forward, and I'm not suggesting it needs to happen, in the next 5 years or so, but as we move forward as an organization, we're at some point going to have to transition to life cycle-based capital planning to be able to more fairly distribute the costs for major capital renewal, and to make the kind of spikiness that we're going to experience in the next few years less prevalent. So this is illustrative of what we're talking about. What we're going to be experiencing potentially, depending on the decisions of yourselves and the board, is a period of debt financing over the next 25 years to allow for major capital renewal. But what this illustrates is that starting in 2047, there's an opportunity to sock money away into the reserves at a much less rate, such that when those major capital projects reappear 100 years down the road, that there is the balance available in the reserves built up over time to allow for renewal of those assets. What's not stated here is that obviously as an asset moves through its life cycle, there would also be probably interim expenditures against that asset to do interim works, so that those reserves wouldn't necessarily be available in their totality, but they would be there to complete that work to ensure that the asset meets its projected life cycle. So as I mentioned, this is a diagram that illustrates the impact on our reserve balances depending on how the board chooses to pay for them. So our recommended approach, which is to debt finance both the Shabamika and Kashwakamak projects, is in the blue. And it allows us to maintain reserve balances roughly in the 600,000 mark across our in totality amongst our capital reserves. You can see that whether or not we debt finance just cash or just Shabamika, that we get down to zero or quite frankly in a negative position, which of course is not feasible, but it just shows you the significant impact that financing has on maintaining healthy reserves. The next one shows you that while moving back to stop lock design recovers the reserves somewhat, it's still under those financing of just cash or just SHAB. They're well below what I would consider, levels that I would be, comfortable recommending to the board. To have less than 200,000 in a capital reserve is not a good idea. So whether or not we go with stop logs or bascule gate, the impact on our reserves is still very significant. So the debt financing assumptions that we are working to are shown in this slide. So you can see that the impact on our annualized payments would be roughly $76,000 a year once we're paying for both of them. And that equates to roughly 9.7% of our own source revenues. And so reflecting back on the limits that the province imposes on municipalities, that's well within the 25% established for municipalities. But obviously it's higher than we are at today. This shows how we would pay for the 10-year capital. And so I think you would all notice that while we're proposing on the operating side that we maintain standard type of increments year over year, that to afford this capital program, that higher percentage increases are required. And this is, a tentative schedule of increases. You can see that the actual dollar value increment, of the 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5, they max out around the $40,000 mark. So while the percentage can, provide a bit of sticker shock, the actual dollar increment is not that significant in the scheme of things. And this is why we felt more comfortable providing these kind of increments on the capital side of the budget. So now I'm going to delve into the operating budget. So again, going back to the discussions that happened a week ago with the Policy and Priority Committee, again, the programs are focused on the higher risk items, but also the transitioning that's going to have to happen as an organization as we move forward with whatever legislative and regulatory changes come in. And we do anticipate a good amount of time is going to be needed this year and next to allow for that transition. because we're anticipating having to negotiate MOUs with each municipality, potentially changing our planning policies, procedures, and our same with our regulatory documents, our business processes, likely in terms of how we interact, also possibly with the province on the whole new appeal process that's being proposed. So it's going to be a significant year of change depending on what comes down. As part of the ongoing initiative of Conservation Ontario looking to maintain or improve service standards, and of course the challenge will be to maintain and improve while going through this flux. So a lot of thought and effort is going to have to go into that. As I've mentioned previously when we were talking about the pressures, we absolutely need to be putting a lot more time and effort into project management of our capital program. Understaffing has compromised our delivery of the capital program. Certainly in 2019, the flood situation was significant. And then this year with staff turnover and all the changes and disruption we've had associated with COVID, it's really come to the highlight. And then for all of these reasons, ever since 2017 with the first major flood, there have been so much change in this organization that there are fairly significant concerns about staff morale and maintaining reasonable workloads. So from an operational perspective, these are areas that need to be focused on. So some of the things we did in developing the 3-year operating budget was the first step that we took was to redistribute all the full-time equivalent positions and operating costs to better align with the programs and services as defined in the Section 39 grant guidelines. And this is a green book that was issued back in 1997 when this whole grant program was revamped. And so we realigned the costs to reflect those guidelines and also what had been proposed under Bill 108 and under Section 20 of the Revised Act. Now, of course, in the past 2 weeks, as we all know, that's sort of gone up in the air. So, I mean, I still think that the analysis we did was valuable and will serve us well going forward. I just obviously can't speak to what's going to happen going forward. So some of the rejigging that we did for this whole 3-year interim financial plan, as well as the annual budget, may yet need to be rejigged again, depending on what unfolds in the coming weeks and months. Some more, I'll call it systemic changes that we made. We increased our professional services budget by $10,000 to reflect actuals in recent years. We've also added $42,000 for enhanced washroom cleaning, and this is all COVID driven. And it's a combination of COVID, but also it's, in terms of the health unit recommendation coupled with much greater use of our CAs. So not only are we mandated by the health unit to clean more frequently, but there is actually a physical necessity to, because our CAs are seeing much higher usage. It does add of FTE to help us deliver on the corporate program while meeting our planning demands. So one of the things that confounds, I think, many of us during this whole COVID is that nothing in COVID has stopped the housing boom, and it has placed tremendous pressures on our team here in terms of turning around all the applications that have been coming in. So there's definitely been no slowing down of applications and queries from the public and developers, et cetera, associated with COVID. And because our engineering team play an important role in those planning reviews, to the extent that they're required to meet those timelines under planning reviews and permitting applications, it takes them away from the capital program. So this is why what we're proposing to do is this FTE is actually a civil engineering technician. It's not a full engineer who can work with our planning group on those rank and file kind of applications so that the engineering team can focus more on the capital program and the higher needs kind of planning and permit applications. So it's a mid-level kind of position in the organization. We're also looking to repurpose one FTE for a stewardship pilot. So as you're aware, under the Bill 108 and Bill 229, education programs, stewardship programs, all of those sorts of things it's questionable whether they'll be eligible for the municipal levy going forward. And when we suspended the education program earlier this year, I took a hard look at the numbers for that program. And I concluded that, quite frankly, it was not a cost-effective program. And that perhaps there were better ways that we could be in liaising with the public in a manner that resonated more with the public and with a broader area of the watershed, recognizing that the education program was confined very much to the Milliken Tail. A stewardship program can be much more far-reaching. And as you can see, it could decrease our costs in terms of program delivery. It also see a decrease in revenues, in that we obviously receive revenues from institutions when we delivered the education program. But we feel that the difference could be more than offset by grants that we've been successful in obtaining in the past to deliver things like tree planting, et cetera. So all that to say that we think it would be a revenue neutral kind of thing to do. And what I feel this would allow us to do is to, before, seizing on changes to the overall municipal levy and under these MOUs, to try a different tactic and give it an opportunity to see what we can do under that program and whether it meets the interests of the municipalities. So this would be a 3-year pilot, repurposing an existing FTE at revenue neutral, on a revenue neutral basis. The operating budgets exclude students for the museum and field studies. And they'll, from going forward, these type of positions would be dependent upon grants. And similarly, it excludes any sort of increments associated with the job evaluation process we've just recently completed and that we'll be discussing in camera later. So this table illustrates to you how the costs were reallocated amongst the main programs and services, where mandatory is a combination of what Section 39 guidelines state are eligible costs and what Bill 108, the CA Act amendments indicated would be mandatory programming. What you're seeing under municipal are the costs that are recovered through existing MOUs. And then the balance other is what we feel will be neither defined as mandatory nor subject to an existing MOU. And so this is really what's in the balance going forward. The reason why I've highlighted the areas in red, the technical studies and the planning and regulations, is because these are 2 areas of considerable uncertainty, whereas the last column, it's fairly, I'll say fairly obvious to us that they will not be eligible for the municipal levy going forward. It's less clear to us how those 2 line items will be impacted by the regulatory changes. And you can see that there's significant staffing associated with them. So depending on what happens, it could be quite impactful to the organization. So in summary, these are the draft numbers for the next 3 years. You can see that it varies depending on the capital program, such that in fact next year would be the highest year, and that 22 and 23 are actually lower than 2021, but that's a function of the capital program. And then in terms of impact on municipal levies, yes, they do go up year over year. And so the assumptions regarding the operating side is basically continuance of historical trend there, whereas the capital begins to implement those revised increments that I showed on that earlier table. So that's that. So more than happy to take any number of questions, and Ange is here as well. And we have the whole management team on the line. So we're able to answer whatever questions you have, I hope. And I'm going to stop the share here.
Okay, thanks, Sally. Because there is just the 5 of us, feel free just to put your hand up. And if you have any questions, go ahead, Phil.
I just wanted to make a comment on the education program. It's always been a bit of a disappointment to me that the Board of Education didn't seem to buy into the importance of our education program, and therefore we even had to subsidize the buses that brought the children out through our program. And I just thought that was, boy, they don't really respect what we're offering. So perhaps they're better funded than we are. Perhaps it'd be appropriate that they do the job themselves then. Anyway, that's my comment. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Go ahead, Eli.
First of all, thank you, Sally, and the team for a budget presentation. Obviously, there's no surprises, but what I'm looking at, and you touch on, even during pandemic, the growth, especially in your large catchment area, which is the city of Ottawa, has not slowed down. And so my question to you is, based on what we know and the pandemic, from staff perspective, do you have, I know you don't have the luxury other organizations have where you can split the team, to 2 so they don't cross contamination, God forbid, if somebody sick. But do you have a plan in place, or do we budget for the unforeseen COVID impact on the organization?
Okay, so in fact, we have managed split teams.
Okay.
For our dam operations, we have 2 teams of 2, and they're not supposed to interact, and because that is part of our resiliency program. Is that what you're asking for, Eli?
But I'm more, not just for that, for all the I know it's operational, and you are the manager of operation. I'm not interfering with the operation, how you do it, but I just want to know is there's a plan in place, because the growth is still happening. There's big demand on permits. There's big demand on other, but at the same time we are dealing with COVID. So.
So we already do split staff in terms of jurisdictions, and very few people are working at the office these days. Most people are, since we entered into the second wave, most people are back working at home, maybe coming in 1 day a week. Just to check in with their managers. The management team tends to be here more, but I mean, we do have the luxury of a very, good office space here. So it's not like we're at City Hall or Constellation where people are on top of each other, right? So we have been, and everybody now wears masks in the office. So we are taking best practice, I think, there in terms of mitigating impacts on our ability to deliver service.
And my other question, and I think I asked that before, and it should be no surprise to Angie, when we talk about borrowing for our organization or our conservation, for the size we are in, if you compare it to other area of same size, I don't want to compare ourselves to the larger group or to the smaller group, but from where we are we on a level 1 to 10? Where are we? Are we on the top, or are we on the bottom, or are we in the middle? When we talk about borrowing and how much we have borrowed, like same as the city allowed to borrow 25%, but we're only 7.5%. I just want to know, do you have that number where we are? I think you're on mute, Sally. You muted yourself.
Yeah, Ange is opposite. So I'll just, in terms of how we compare to other municipalities you've worked at in terms of our borrowing capacity and what we're proposing.
So
Two.
How's that? All right. So we are less than, sorry, it's me now.
Okay, pardon me, we're just having technical issues here. I just need to, there we go. Go ahead.
All right. So we are more and more increasingly in the rural municipalities, the smaller municipalities, borrowing and debt financing is becoming more and more popular because of the capital plans that are coming into place and being put into place. So we are in stride with the smaller municipalities. This is not a strange topic for the city of Ottawa or for town of Carleton Place with huge development. Unfortunately, the asset management plans and whatnot are the capital needs in all municipalities of our size or in our watershed are all feeling the same growing pains that we do not have enough in reserve to cover the capital replacements. And so debt is a viable solution to help us get us through.
Eli, you're muted there. There we go.
Sorry. You do that at least once a day. Angie, my other question is, in comparison to other organizations of our size, are we on the high end of borrowing or in the middle or in the low? When you compare us to another
We're very
conservation
low.
authority.
We're low.
We're low, okay, okay. I mean, it is great sometimes to take advantage of low interest or basically now there's no interest at all and take advantage of it and be able to do a project because sometimes, and I think some of you on the call, we know the city, we borrow in 2012 over $300 million to catch up with the asset management because we know if we wait 2 more years or 3 years to repair those assets, it's going to cost us more than the little interest we had to pay at the time. So that was a good business decision to borrow at the time, even with a 2% interest rate, but we save because the product, as you know, it goes up more than 2%, especially the material for roads and road repair. So anyway, I'm glad you have that foresight and you're thinking ahead, but we could, and to be applauded for, to be honest with you, but I need you somehow, I know Sally, your time is and you're going fast, it's Friday afternoon, I know, but I need you to package it in a way, simple, plain language. If we don't fix our asset, if we don't borrow to fix the roof today, tomorrow we might have to replace the whole roof. So let's be honest about this. This is your asset management. If you don't do the investment today, the longer you wait, the more expensive it's going to get. And now is window opportunity for us with the low interest, and we have the capacity to borrow. We should do it now.
Agree. And I should raise that we sent the interim financial plan to our auditor, Glenn Street. Glenn Street. And he was very complimentary. He thought we were right on track. So that was reassuring.
Good to hear. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Sally.
Janet and Paul, any questions or comments from yourselves? Go ahead, Janet.
Thank you, Krista. So just to clarify, this is more clarified because I mean, I've heard this all in the Priorities and Planning Committee meeting as well, but the capital plan, it does assume that we're going to get WECI funding because that's the 50% for Shabamika and Kashwaknak. So it makes that assumption. The plan and the budgets assume that we are debt financing those 2 dams. And in particular, Shabamika next year is when it needs, the work needs to at least start or begin. And so that the increase in the capital levy over time is assuming the payback of something that is 50% financed by WECI, but 50% under municipal levy. So those are all the assumptions in that payback. And we haven't included on a positive side, the possibility for funding from a federal infrastructure type grant, because we can't make that assumption at this point in time. But that's essentially what has been assumed. Because of course, to make comment, the numbers are larger than what we had looked at in 2018 and understand the reasons for that. But having been part of the board at the 2018, the intent at the time had been to try to equally spread out the payments, over the 10 years. And so understand the rationale, but it is what it is. So anyway, it's really more just clarifying those and making the comment on the change.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank you.
Paul, did you have any comments at all before we move ahead with the motion?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So if there's no other comments, I'll go to a motion so we can keep moving forward here. So the motion is, be it resolved that the committee recommend that the board of directors approve the draft interim financial plan and update to the 10-year capital plan. So mover and seconder. Thank you, Eli. The seconder. Thanks, Phil. All those in favor? Thank you. So that carries. So now we'll move over to the budget, please. The draft budget. Back over to you, Sally.
Yep, I'll just share my screen. I'm just gonna get rid of myself here. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
No, we're not seeing your screen just yet.
You need to share your screen, Sally,
Let's try
or
that.
Angie, I'm not
There
sure.
it is.
Okay.
There it is now.
Okay, excellent. Sorry about that. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so let's just see here what's going on. There we go. So as I mentioned in the last one, we did rejig where costs line up in the budget. So if you did a comparison sheet by sheet, you will see that some things changed. And that was to address this alignment where we were trying to very clearly identify for ourselves what likely will be eligible for the municipal levy going forward and what won't be. And we think, it was a tremendous exercise for everybody. Actually, the whole management team participated in that, of course. And regardless of what happens with Bill 108 or Bill 229, I think it'll help us enormously going forward. So I just wanted to refresh this in that, so 2 million of our total payroll is what we consider to be mandatory as we interpreted Bill 108 when we were drafting this. So the balance of costs, you may recall at a previous meeting, I said roughly 1/3. Some of that is because of service delivery costs other than payroll would be under the other categories. So we've divided the service areas into these 5 themes. So I'm just going to run through each category to highlight what the program comprises of this year. So under 2021 for the watershed management, we need to do field work to collect bathymetry data. We're going to be expanding the monitoring network. We want to be developing digital forms to enhance our ability to collect and manage data. Automate our QA/QC protocols and procedures, and also develop this raster tool for flood forecasting and warning. This is a tool we're working on in partnership with other conservation authorities. There's a total of 10 of us working on this in Eastern Ontario on the Whiskey project, and about half of us are moving forward with the raster tool. Technical studies and watershed planning, our focus from a capital program side of things is moving forward with the Shabamika Lake Dam rehabilitation. Kashwakamak Lake Dam next year will be about doing the dam safety review. And this is a review that will help to inform the environmental assessment we're going to have to do on that dam to then do the detailed design and replace it 3-4 years out. And lastly, we need to continue management of the Carp River Erosion Control Project. This is a project we're doing under contract for the City of Ottawa, and it is on a cost recovery basis. So, but it does, take time and effort of staff to work on that. Some of the technical and planning studies, of course, we're going to continue and complete our watershed management plan. We have MOUs to complete floodplain mapping on the Carp, the Casey Creek, and Watts Creek and Shirley's Brook areas. We wanted to move forward with the study of the wetlands in the growth areas so that we can work with area municipalities on identifying how we can manage growth and potentially look at no net loss models. And then lastly, doing the flood risk analysis using the LIDAR data that we're looking to acquire under our capital program. On planning review and regulations, I think it's pretty safe to say that everything aside from plain old fashioned service delivery will be focused on whatever comes down per the legislative and regulatory changes, because those are the two groups that will be most impacted by the changes. So you can see, it's everything from revising our own business practices and procedures and guidelines through to negotiating new MOUs with member municipalities. On the conservation services side, this is speaking to a period of transition next year where we're proposing that we continue suspension of the education program and pilot the stewardship program. And in the meantime, look at alternative service delivery models for CA-based curriculum with the school boards. And this is where we would look at piloting use of the eco-trekker at the Carp River Conservation Area and seeing what kind of uptake we have and opportunities to expand to our other CAs. In terms of visitor services, the main highlight is that that 42,000 that I mentioned already, which is I don't see that it's an avoidable cost in terms of increasing washroom cleaning and care at our conservation areas. Oh, sorry, I'm mixing myself up there. Under visitor services, this is relating to the museum, pardon me. So as you're aware, we had reduced hours at the museum and we're proposing to maintain that again going forward this season. And of course, there's no demand for rentals of the gatehouse facility at this time. So we're definitely reduced levels of service on the visitor service side. So back to property management, I mentioned the washroom cleaning, but also we're taking on a new conservation area. So there's going to be some work associated with that, and we very much view that as a good news story. So that's a nice thing to be able to talk about. On the corporate side of things, we are moving forward with the strategic plan. Of course, at the corporate level, we'll be needed to manage any sort of new changes coming down through the legislation. I already mentioned previously that a focus of mine is to work with the management team on mental health in the workplace and workload management. During the discussion of the pressures, the operating pressures, I mentioned that we have several outstanding legal matters, and these are important because as we move forward with our capital program and our desires to transfer ownership of properties, we really have to resolve these ownership matters around our various structures, just even to enable us to get approvals for things like temporary easements and the like for construction. And then I think it's fair to say that one of the issues that MVCA has amongst a sector of the population in the watershed is a credibility gap. And this is a concern of mine and the leadership position here at the organization is to continue to do my best to build working relationships with all of the municipalities and key stakeholders, and also to demonstrate the kind of financial oversight and planning that the community expects from our organization. And so certainly all the work that we've been doing this year on this interim financial plan and update to the 10-year capital plan, I think will serve us in good stead in that regard. So my intent is to continue to work on those relationships and build the credibility of the organization in the community. On the communication side of things, of course, there's those standard things that always are part of our operations here in terms of flood forecasting and warning and support to the projects we deliver on, but also supporting the watershed planning work. And then some of the highlights, new things going forward next year we will have to do a lot of work to educate the community on changes that come through the regulation. We want to promote and our stewardship pilot, because if we're going to make a go of it, we want it to be successful. We'll need to invest some time and energies into promoting it. And then lastly, as I mentioned previously, support to the testing of the EcoTrekker mobile app for education purposes. So some of the things that weren't identified in the IFP specific to 2021 are increase in fees that we're anticipating associated with plan reviews, regulatory permits, and our parking passes. And the first two speak to the ongoing crazy development pressures that we're seeing despite COVID. And then the last one is because we have seen an increase and we expect that increased usage at our facilities to continue well into 2021. So this slide simply highlights from the 10-year capital plan what we're moving forward with in 2021. They're all high priority projects. The one thing I want to highlight to you is the fourth bullet. We just became aware that under the NDMP that this could be eligible for grant applications. So I do have a motion that I'm looking for support from the committee later on. Basically, looking for us to be able to apply for grants for anything that we have identified in the 2021 budget, because we may yet, other opportunities arise, and the NDMP project window is as expected. It was announced a week and a half ago or so, 2 weeks ago maybe, and it's due December 1st. So the timelines that we're dealing with are crazy. It's been a very stressful 2 to 3 weeks because it's all been happening at once. But kudos to the team. Everybody's really stepped up to the plate, not just within MVCA, but we've been partnering extensively with our other CAs in Eastern Ontario on the applications, on responding to Bill 229, any number of things. So here's how it breaks out and looks in pie chart form. So you can see, in rough terms, where the money's being spent and where the money's coming from. And so, to our whole discussion around Bill 229, under the 21 budget, a grand total of 2% of our revenues will come from the Section 39 funding, and 13% assuming we get our WECI grants for the Shabomika project. So here are the sum totals in year over year. So you can see how things change between 20 and 21. Of course, the big difference is the capital. Bear in mind, of course, we weren't able to move forward with our capital program in 2021. So only a fraction of that was actually expended. So that money went back in the kitty. But the increase next year is to reflect all those things that we've discussed at previous meetings regarding not replacing like for like, the actual costs that we've been getting back from during the design phase and the like. So lastly, this is the impact on the municipal levies, and this is totally in accordance with the direction we received back in October, where it's 1.5 plus 2 on the general levy side and 2.5 on the capital levy side. Did I say that right, Anne? She's nodding at me. So there you go. So this reflects the direction we received from the board. There's just a couple of other little items that we wanted to highlight to you that haven't been included. Normally, every year, both ourselves and Carleton Place contribute $5,000 per year towards improvements at Roy Brown Park. We were not able to use that money this year. And I think it was an oversight that we forgot to bring it forward, or how did we want to handle that, Ange, in terms of 2021?
Just that it was deferred. So we're, because of lumber prices and whatnot, we're going to try to get the funds from Town Carleton Place to be.
Okay, so
Maybe just next
I don't
year.
know if you guys could hear her on my speaker or my mic. Were you able to hear what she said?
No, just
No.
repeat it, please.
Yeah, I will. So one of the reasons we deferred it is because you may have noticed that lumber prices went through the roof. And what we had hoped to accomplish this year, we just thought, you know what, this isn't worth it. Our dollar is not buying what it should. So what we've done is deferred that expenditure to next year, or proposing to, and we're asking Carleton Place to do likewise, that the monies that they would have given to us this year, that they allocate to next year. Also, we didn't manage to capture in $450 associated with high-speed internet. Now, is that a monthly cost or is that overall annual? Okay, so it's a modest difference, but these things we'll try to capture in the next iteration of the budget that goes forward to the board on December 2nd. So I think that's the last slide. Yes, it is. So I'll stop sharing and happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Sally. I see Eli has his hand up already.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And Sally, on slide 13, I know you took it off, but the contribution to the capital is a lot less next year. Do you know why?
Because we'd be using part of that to fund the Shavamika and other projects. So,
Okay.
yeah. So some projects would still be PAYCO, and therefore that's what we would project putting back into the reserves that year.
So when we say we contribute 2% to the capital, like what is the standard? Like how much of your funding you allocate for capital and how much for operation?
Oh, that varies. Yeah, that varies significantly year over year, right? So depending on the capital program, the budget breakdown between operating capital can vary significantly. I think what we're looking to do, though, is to ameliorate the impact on the municipal levy so that it's not similarly going up and down.
So do we contribute, and that's what I'm going with, do we contribute enough to the capital, or we need to do a little bit more, and that's why we fall behind?
I would say that absolutely going forward, I mean, we certainly recommending that more needs to go into capital. I'm sensitive to the affordability, you know, of all the municipalities, especially these days. So that's why the increment, annualized increment, I didn't feel anybody could stomach anything more than 6.5%. But I think over the longer term, as we move through the next 10 years and we see how the economy unfolds, we see how these major capital projects unfold, and that we need to seriously look at building our capital reserves more.
I don't want to bring the discussion we usually have on the city side to this group, but we fell short through the years. So whenever, you know, we ask our own staff to go do asset management report, and they came to us and they say, you know, that's what you need, and we ignore that. And now you're under two pressure: one, because you know about it, and two, how do you know what I mean? Like the gap keep getting bigger. So I'm not sure. Maybe one day as a committee, finance, you know, the financial committee can sit together and brainstorm some of this. And I'm not saying you should do it today for this budget, but at least we need to have a standard on the front of us, or a roadmap better, to say, you know, that's what we need. I understand affordability. Trust me, I hear that every day from the mayor. We're shortfall. I got this. But at the same time, you still have to do those things. You're not going to be able to say, oh, well, okay, I'll take it off the book, so it's going to go away. Well, it's not going to go away. We need to face it. So I just hope one day we'll take time outside the budget pressure and talk about this, call it a long-term financial session, whatever you want to call it, but give us an hour or so. We can sit together and talk about the long term. Madam Chair, I would really suggest that in the new year to be able to sit together. You have your own experience in your municipality. A lot of my colleagues have their own. I think if we put it together, I think we can give good direction to staff to move forward. So it's not every year we have to, sorry for the term, but steal from Peter to give Paul, or the other way around, like between capital. So we need to build our own capital fund. But I mean, I just, for the budget, I'm fine. Thank you very much. It's a great job. But I just keep thinking we need to have a long-term plan.
So I'm very happy to come back with what I would say would be a theoretical contributions to capital reserve based upon if we were to take a full life cycle approach to our asset management. That would be, I would consider sort of your worst case scenario in terms of from what the demand would be, but then it becomes a starting point for the conversation. Here's where we're at today, and here's where in theory you might be if you wanted to take a full life cycle approach to asset management.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, if I can follow up. Will that be possible also will help you if you have some program federally, provincially, cost sharing, shovel ready? Won't that help you if you already have the plan in place?
Always, yeah. And I mean, where we're at right now, though, is that we don't even have the studies and the EAs completed to have shovel-ready projects. So that's where we're at with Cache, the Cache-Wakamak Lake Dam. Like, we really need to do some homework on our dams to be in a better position. Right now, the only project that, and even Shabamika is in a difficult position right now because we've run into hurdles on the detailed design side of things. But, we don't have the shovel-ready projects to be able to apply for those grants. So it's unfortunate.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I hope we can just have a meeting after the budget or in the new year where we can really take a deep dive to this, Madam Chair. Anyway, I'm done. Thank you very much.
I think that's a really a very good suggestion, Eli. Because you're right, things don't go away. They only get bigger, right? So, other comments from anyone on the draft budget? Phil.
Yes, a couple of things. I certainly agree with what Eli was saying, in the sense of knowing if there are to have shovel-ready projects is great, but also to know if we can get some of this matching funding of 50% is really important to us. The other thing is, I just think we should clarify in the EA studies that my expectation is that the main purpose of what we're trying to accomplish is flooding control. So I've asked staff if they'd come up with which dams are the ones that are just called low flow augmentation. But I believe it's important that we understand that. To the extent that we can have some ready-made or alternatively prepared places for water storage, I think it's really an important role for us to help fund all the, or at least for Ottawa, to pay 90% of the cost of funding, is that we can say this is great because it's augmenting or supplementing the storage capabilities that we have. So I think that's important. The new conservation area, is that the Carp River area?
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay, and I just wanted to comment on the estimate for planning fees and so on. It seems to be a bit of a irritant with the province, but I was pleased to see that at least from our perspective, we were, in spite of the generosity of our board, which gave 50% off the fees, with the increased volume or whatever, they came within $1,500 of the, it's projected to be within $1,500 of the amount. So perhaps you could pass along our appreciation that they've worked hard to make up for our generosity, and hopefully we look good to the people who are planning renovations and getting their homes out of floodplains and stuff like that. So grateful for that. The one thing I'm a bit concerned about, I saw one full-time equivalent for cleaning. Is there any way that we could work a little harder at trying to get local people? Like I was reading in your previous report, we got to drive all the way if you need 2 people, you got to send 2 cars all the way to wherever you're going to do the job. So there must be people around Purdon and Morris Island that we could pay for. We've been blessed for years in that a volunteer committee has done all that stuff, but they're getting older and they probably don't want to do that stuff in this COVID period. But maybe if we offered to pay them, that might be a lot cheaper than paying time and mileage for 2 vehicles to go out to the Conservation Authority. So I think I just reluctant to see another full-time equivalent person brought on, because as COVID goes away, that person won't drop off the staff likely. So contracting it out, I think, would be a great idea for having the cost just as long as it's necessary, and then we can maybe go back to and perhaps it's worthwhile having some what we do at the grocery store. They give you a little spray can to go around and clean your cart, even though they've already done it. So maybe those kind of approaches might be worth considering, because getting there to do the frequent cleaning expected is a challenge. I just want to thank the staff for the hard work that they put in and the late nights you put in looking at these budgets. I try to look at this stuff just over a day and I get tired of it already. So thank you again for your good work, staff.
Thanks, Phil. Sally, did you have a comment?
Yeah, Phil, the full-time equivalent was for civil engineering technologist, not for a cleaning person. The 42,000 is to find somebody local to do exactly as you described. That's exactly what we're aiming to do.
I'll sleep better tonight. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions, Janet or Paul?
Nope, none for me. I think it's a very, it's so comprehensive and easy. It's easy to understand the rationale. I have no comments.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Anything you wanted to add or clarify?
I'm trying to remain quiet, please.
All right, in that case, I'm going to go to the motion. And the motion is, be it resolved that the Finance and Administration Advisory Committee recommend the draft 2021 budget to the Board of Directors for consideration and circulation to member municipalities for comment. Is there a mover and seconder for this resolution? Thanks, Paul. And second?
Second.
Phil? And all in favor? Thank you, that carries. So we'll jump in the agenda to other business. And as I'd mentioned at the beginning, there's 2 items we're going to look at in other business. The first is an update on the LiDAR. And the second is the NDMP grant application. So Sally, I'll turn it over to you for both of those.
Yeah, just very quickly. So after getting the board's approval to proceed with a LiDAR application, we did present to both the county councils of Frontenac and to Lanark to make them aware that this is something we want to move forward with. And so all the mayors and reeves are familiar with it. We're hosting information sessions for all the CAOs on Monday to begin to present to them the purpose of the project and potential cost sharing opportunities. We got the impression, I think, from both levels of counties that that they're interested, that municipalities do see the value of LiDAR, not just to the Conservation Authority, but to all levels of government. So we are optimistic that we will have other players come to the table to help offset costs to the authority. So it's a good news story. The turnaround time is fantastically short. We'll have the meeting on Monday. We need to probably secure some sort of intent to fund by the end of next week. The deadline is a week Tuesday, December 1st. So it's going to be kind of fast and furious over the next week. The second item I wanted to speak to on the NDMP is that, as I mentioned earlier, that we've identified at least one other project in our budget, and things are moving so quickly, there may be other grant opportunities for items in our 2021 budget to seize upon. And so the one in particular that Euro raised to my attention just today, this is how quickly things are moving, would be to help offset the costs associated with the gauge work that we're looking to do next year, and to update our curves. I'm losing my language, and I seem to have lost my motion as well. Oh, there it is. 1 second. Sorry. Our rating curves on the system, and these are important for us in terms of doing our flood forecasting and warning work. So I sent to Krista just earlier a proposed motion that I would like for you to consider, just broadly giving us the authority to move forward with grant applications as we see opportunities arise, because everything's happening so quickly.
I think we certainly want to have you take advantage of those opportunities. Is there any question before I read the motion? Phil?
Just if I could add a word of endorsement. Those LiDAR flights are just so important, and they're so helpful when you're not only for Conservation Authority work, but when you're doing planning work and so on. They're just invaluable. And if you can pass that along to the planners and the CEOs, and frankly, it saves a lot of calls to your planning staff that you look at the map and you can figure out what the heck you're going. Ottawa's been great. They've done flights every couple of years, but this recently it's going to be 4 years before they get to the next flight. But they're just really so helpful in trying to work out distances and everything like that. Just a wonderful planning opportunity, and I think you should look at that. And I guess the question I would ask is, are these gauges that you're looking at, are they electronic that report directly to us, as opposed to ones you got to go out and read, like the staff gauges?
I believe anything we're putting in these days, Phil, is remote, that we are not putting in physical gauges that we have to go in a car to read. We're moving forward.
Well, good for that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if there's nothing further, I'm going to read the resolution. So be it resolved that the Finance and Administration Committee endorse the submission of a grant applications to support implementation of the 2021 capital and operating programs as set out in the draft 2021 budget. Is there a mover and seconder for this recommendation?
No.
Thank you, Eli. Seconded by Phil. Thank you very much. All in favor? Thank you, and that carries. So we'll be moving into camera for the next two items. And my motion is, be it resolved that the committee move to in-camera session for discussion of the following matter regarding labor relations or employee negotiations, and further resolved that Sally McIntyre remain in the room. So
Okay,
mover and
thank you.
seconder for that, please. Thanks, Paul. In a second.
Second.
Thanks, Eli. All in favor? Thank you. So we'll move in camera and I'll just give a moment for us to